All right, let's get it. It is going to be a good episode. It is going to be a good week for everybody. Hello, amazing people. Welcome back to your favorite weekly racing podcast. We talk updates, we talk tech talk, we do all the good stuff here. It is time for another hot lap. Buckle up, get your helmet, and let's go for a ride. First of all, I've realized I've never introduced myself. Hello, I'm Darius. I'll be your host. We're going to talk this week, diving into the worlds of Formula 1 and NASCAR, as we discuss some of the key events and news around the F1 race that took place in Japan around the Suzuka circuit, and the NASCAR race that took place around the Martinsville track. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, it's time. Let's get straight into it. Starting off in the realm of Formula 1, we have the race. Now, Suzuka, personally for me, has never been my favorite track, especially on things like racing simulators to race around. I just am never able to get the S's right. I think it's a very pretty track, and it's one of the tracks that it's like, I know I will like this when I get it down. And I'm starting to get it down, and I'm really starting to like it. When I first started, I did not like it at all. I thought it was horrible. It was too technical for me. It was just not fun to race around. But now, watching Formula 1 go around it and getting better and understanding it myself, I absolutely adore Suzuka. And this race is no different. We got a lot of fantastic action. On lap 1, when the lights went out, when it was lights out, and away we were going, Max Verstappen stayed in front of Sergio Perez. Of course, the two Red Bulls finished 1-2 in qualifying. They let us out the gate. But then, after the first corner, we got a little frisky. Alexander Albon and Daniel Ricciardo ended up coming together and going into the wall after their collision and bringing out the safety car. What happened was, Albon was on the inside of turn 1, which put him on the outside to go into the S's. Daniel Ricciardo was on the outside of turn 1, kind of in front of Albon. And I think Alonso was on his inside. So he thought Alonso was here and Albon was further behind him. So he moved wide. And that movement wide, obviously, it pushed Albon onto the grass. I don't even think they collided right then. But then when Albon went onto the grass, he lost traction, hit Daniel's rear tire. Both of them got sent off into the barriers. Daniel Ricciardo's tire exploded after that collision. Technically, it was Daniel's fault for moving across the track, but he was absolutely not expecting Alex to be there, but rather for that driver, I believe it was Alonso, to be on his inside. I think that's kind of the race that he was focused on. It was Daniel's fault. Unfortunately, personally, I love Daniel Ricciardo. I love how he is as a person. I think that when he was at Red Bull, he was in his prime, and that was fantastic. I wish we got to see more. I wish he stayed there longer. But I just don't think he has that competitive edge that is required to stay in Formula 1. I think maybe following Grosjean to IndyCar or Formula E or something like that. Maybe even NASCAR. He loves being in Texas and being in the United States. So NASCAR might be his thing too. I just don't know if Formula 1 is it, and if it is, he can only compete in a competitive car. That being said, Williams, if Alex Albon's chassis is unrepairable, have 0 chassis left until Miami. That means that next week's race in Shanghai, in China, they will only have 1 car in the grid. Now, they're probably going to end up racing something that looks like this. If you're not watching on YouTube, I put up the Formula 1 car that is a 2-seater. So it's a driver and a passenger sitting behind them that they do little hot laps with, you can pay to go race in it. But anyways, they're probably going to end up developing something like that for Alex and Logan. And they'll just have to fight over who gets the driver's seat and who gets the passenger seat. This is good news. However, because if they finish in the top 10, then both Williams will finish in the top 10. Both drivers will be in the top 10 unless they finish 10th, and then it's like 10th and 11th. You know what I'm saying? So yeah. So that could be good for Williams. That could be something that they're looking for. Maybe Alpine should consider that. Just putting all their R&D into one car so they don't have to run two. But we'll see what happens. We'll see how that goes. All to look forward to for the development, basically, to see if Williams will be able to race two cars at the next couple Grand Prix, or if they will have to only race one car, and then if so, who gets the seat. So this is a very, very important race for Logan Sargent, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. On the restart, Max Verstappen stayed in front of Checo Perez again as the top 5 all hold their same order. Leclerc and Hamilton swapped positions, moving Leclerc up into P7. He started the Grand Prix in P8. The Alpines come together on lap 4. We hear that over the radio. We never get a replay. We never see. So I assume that the damage was very minuscule and that it didn't really affect their race too much. Maybe it did because they finished so far behind everybody else, but maybe it didn't. Who knows? I don't think it was too important. Both Red Bulls quickly gathered a 1 second gap from the following car. Max Verstappen getting a 1 second gap from Perez. Perez getting a 1 second gap from whoever was behind him at that point. It may have been Carlos Sainz. It may have been Lando Norris. I'm not 100% sure. Russell repassed Yuki Tsunoda for 9th a lap after passing him. That was, I believe, Yuki jumped Russell on the restart, and then Russell got him a lap ladder down the road. Perez was a 10th of a second slower than Max in this race, slowly falling back from him a little bit, but still pulling away from whoever was in third. It was a very, very dominant showing from Red Bull this weekend. I think that, as I said in the last episode, this weekend is going to be very telling for the rest of the season, and I do believe that Red Bull are just going to kind of dominate. I think Checo Perez is gaining a lot of confidence. It seems like the team are willing to work with him a little bit more, and that is really helping him out to gain his pace, gain his footing, and even get some confidence to try and, when Max doesn't finish a race, they need Checo to be able to fill in and get those podiums and get those race wins. And I think that they know that they have to build confidence in him, and that confidence building will allow him to finish further up the field, making maybe some riskier moves. Who knows? On the restart, Nico Hülkenberg was the big loser. He was in the top 10. This is where he started the restart. He ended up falling way back, having to box for hards at the end of the lap, and running in 18th position, which was last at this point in the Grand Prix after Daniel Ricciardo and Alexander Albon had DNF'd. Perez was getting put under pressure from Leclerc. That's who it was at this point. He locked up, and actually, he wasn't even under pressure from this point. This point is where he got put under pressure from Leclerc because he fell back from Max. He lost 9/10 of a second to Max, so almost a whole second, falling 2 seconds behind and leaving Max to go do his race. This was after he ran wide out of the S's and around the corner. I believe they're the Degnas right there. He ran wide onto the curb, and that curb is actually higher than the clearance of the car. So if you go up there, you kind of rail grind and it bottoms out, and it shot him a little bit wide into the dirt, and that kind of kicked his car out. So he like rail grinded down the curb, and that's how he fell back from Max. Sauber finally having a decent pit stop for Valtteri Bottas. It was not for Zhou, it was for Bottas. Bottas had a decent pit stop. Zhou had an absolute nightmare, but we'll get there. Yuki was called to the pits on lap 8 as everybody was kind of in that window to move to their new set of hard tires, everybody who was doing a 2-stop at least. At this point in the race, we didn't know it yet, but Charles Leclerc was going for a 1-stop race, as well as I believe Lando Norris was on the same strategy. Sainz was 1 second behind Lando, who he needed to pass in order to put pressure on the Red Bulls at this point. We hear him come over the radio saying Lando is struggling, and that was to keep his pace ahead of Sainz. Eventually, Sainz did get past Lando later in the Grand Prix. Up next, we have GP telling Max, "I told you so," in one of the coldest moments of the Grand Prix. One of the coldest moments in Formula One history is telling the two or three time world champion, "I told you so." This was after discussing the front wing update on the downforce drag ratio system that they have. Max says he could use 1 to 2 clicks less, and GP, of course, responding with, "I told you so." Actually, I think he said, "I'm not going to say I told you so," but basically what he means is, "I told you so." So that was very, very cold. Russell then complained about some power steering issues. We never saw it become an issue later on. It was a radio message that we did get. Solid GP for Russell. Not sure if they did end up finding anything, if the steering was broken, if the steering was loose, if there was some fluid leakage. Who knows? Could have all happened. Guan Yu Zhou had a pit stop nightmare. At first, he was brought in just to adjust the drag on his wing. No tires, on some Lightning McQueen type stuff. No tires, just gas, let me go. Then we see him just sitting in the box as the camera cuts back to him. Just chilling there. No mechanics around the car, nothing. He's just chilling in the box, which eventually led to his retirement. Not on track. He just retired in the box, decided he didn't want to do this no mo. He wanted to wait for China to start racing again, which will be his home race, which will be the first Chinese man in Formula One to have a home race at Shanghai. So that's pretty cool. What else do we got? We got Logan Sargent getting past Ocon on lap 15 as he moved to P11. This is very, very important. As I said earlier, his teammate is out. Williams could be down to one car. We really need Sargent to show out, show what he's got, show what he's capable of for Williams, in order to maybe get the prestige over Alex to get that spot in the car, because nobody wants to see Sargent sit out. Nobody wants to see Alex sit out. It'd be great if they could both race. Obviously, that's the best case scenario. But it is not realistic for the back of the grid team to have the funding or the resources necessary in order to get both of their cars on the grid at all times if they keep losing chassis. So therefore, Sargent needs to show out, needs to show up, needs to prove why he belongs on the track. Perez and Sainz box for mediums on lap 16 and hold P2 and 3 respectively. Nothing crazy goes on there. We see Norris get past Hamilton at the end of the straight into turn 1. Perez, after coming out of the box, flies past Hamilton for P5 into 130R, just shooting absolutely around the outside of Hamilton. Caught him with his pants down, caught him lacking. Norris passed Russell into turn 1 for provisional P2, and at this point was only 2 seconds behind Max after the whole pit stop sequence had happened. Sainz later passed Hamilton again to move into 6th position. On lap 21, we see Max Verstappen retake the lead from Charles Leclerc after boxing. Again, Charles had not boxed at this point. He was running on very old, I believe it was hard tires at this point. Maybe it was mediums. I'm not sure if he went medium hard or hard medium, but he did really, really drag out this stint. I do believe it was medium tires. Turn 1, we see turn into a hot spot for overtakes as Alonso passes Hamilton for P7 on lap 22. Perez and Norris battle for third on track. Perez makes a great dive into the last sequence of corners, the little chicane before the long straight, catching Norris out and taking that provisional P3, which was kind of technically P2, but Leclerc was running in P2 and he wasn't going to box. So, essentially it was provisional P2, but it wasn't. It was P3. Anyways, Leclerc did a masterclass. Ferrari actually had a decent strategy this race. Perez and Norris were battling for third. Oh, Ocon. His mechanic came over the radio at this point in the race and was like, "Okay, we need to push. Ocon, push." And he was like, "What do you think I'm doing there, buddy? I've been pushing. What do you mean push?" So that was kind of funny. It actually made me laugh out loud at work when I was rewatching the race to take notes on it. It's just it's so demoralizing as a driver. Like, if he is pushing in this absolute wagon of a Formula One car, like, he's trying his best, he's pushing, and his engineer is in his ear telling him that he's not going fast enough, and it doesn't even look like he is pushing. So that's funny. Yuki Tsunoda had a wholesome thank you to his crew after an absolutely fantastic pit stop. He came into the pits behind, maybe it was like Logan Sargent and with like 4 other people, and had a fantastic, like an absolutely superb pit stop from the RB racing team. Came out in front and had a little thank you and a great job to his crew. Good moment about halfway through the Grand Prix. Leclerc doing his super stint on his mediums. There it is, already 32 laps deep since the restart. Everybody else had boxed at least once and will have to box again. This is where we see Leclerc on a obvious one-stop strategy in the race. Perez sat behind Leclerc for a while on old tires, struggling to pass him to take P2. Eventually, it did catch up to him as he ran wide in the Degnas, and Perez was able to close that gap and get around him. Up next, we have Norris, who's coming up to put pressure on Leclerc for the last podium spot. On lap 27, George Russell squeezed between Norris and Charles Leclerc for a little bit. This was really not what McLaren wanted. Having Norris on the same strategy as Leclerc, it needed to be an on-track battle. Having Russell squeeze between them did not fare well for Lando Norris and the McLaren crew. However, Norris did quickly come back around him the next lap. Lap 30, about half-ish way through the race, Max Verstappen has a 10-second gap between himself and his teammate Sergio Perez running in P2. At this point, the Red Bulls are fairly comfortable. Perez sweeps past Leclerc for P2, making it a RB12 on lap 36. Sainz boxed for fresh hards and returned to the track in P7. Sainz was into 5th as he passed Lewis Hamilton on track, and George Russell took his pit stop. And on lap 42, Logan Sargent locks up and brings out the yellow flags as a battle for the last podium spot strengthens between Norris, Sainz, and Charles Leclerc. Logan Sargent running wide. Really, like, he was running a good race. This was kind of the mistake that's like, all right, they may end up giving that spot to Alex Albon. He just couldn't hold it together. He ran wide in the Degnas himself after locking up onto the gravel and then had to reverse back onto the track. This put him in last place for the remainder of the race. Unfortunately for Logan, because we do want to see him racing. In this battle between Norris, Sainz, and Leclerc, we see Carlos Sainz have the freshest tires, the advantage over Norris and Leclerc, but he was in P5, having Norris in P4 and Leclerc in P3. On lap 45, after the yellow flag went away, we see Carlos Sainz get past Norris, moving up into P4 behind his teammate, in which we hear a radio message from Leclerc where he was told not to battle Sainz and that rather his race was against the Papaya McLaren of Lando Norris behind. Sainz passed Leclerc for the last podium position after the main straight into the first turn. We do see Leclerc making a slightly defensive maneuver, but his tires were much older. Sainz on fresh tires passed and got the last podium spot. This is when we hear Lance Stroll come over the radio and complain about how horrible his Aston Martin is on the straight, saying that their speed is in a different category, which gave everybody a little flashback to Fernando Alonso complaining about the GP2 engine that was in his car around Japan probably 67 years ago when he was racing for... Who was racing for at that point? Renault? I believe he was racing for Renault at that point. Or it was a Renault power unit or something like that. But it was very reminiscent. It gave us little flashbacks. Russell, Piastri, and Alonso battle for the midfield points of P6 through P8. Russell made a little last lap move on Piastri after he locked up through the last series of corners. And we see the race finish in a Red Bull 1-2. Your top 10 for Suzuka are Verstappen, Perez, Sainz, Leclerc, Norris, Alonso, Russell, Piastri, Hamilton, and Yuki Tsunoda. There's your little overlook of the Suzuka International Carnage lot, the Suzuka International Entertainment System, the Grand Prix for my birthday weekend, the weekend of April 7th. April 7th was my birthday. It was very, very fun. I'm glad I got a good, entertaining race out of it. Now, we're going to go ahead and jump into a very quick little tech talk, just something I wanted to bring up from the weekend of Formula One. So let's get straight into that right now. All right, this week's tech talk is going to be about the gyroscopic camera. We saw F1 using a gyroscopic camera on Kevin Magnussen's car. I just wanted to bring it up. I thought it was very, very cool. You can see all the contortions, all the off cambers, the ups and the downs very, very well using the gyroscopic camera. It was very kind of eye-opening, and it gave a little bit more of the sense of real, like the real true speed and how on rails a Formula One car is. The downforce and the aerodynamics of those cars are just insane as you see the car, up on its side going through these corners and going up and down over hills, and it's just glued to the ground as he's driving back and forth. It almost gives the same kind of speed perception as the driver's eye camera, and I think it is really an amazing piece of technology, and I'm glad that Formula One are using it. Maybe I'll find a little visual to put up on the YouTube post for, a little bit of a lap of Kevin Magnussen as we're talking about it. But I think it's very awesome and a very cool development that they made, that gyroscoping camera. Now we're going to go ahead and talk about NASCAR. All right, NASCAR. They raced in Martinsville in the Cookout 400. I could also say that the F1 race was quite the cookout. But the Cookout 400 in Martinsville, we have Larson leading out on lap 1. On lap 57, Larson has a 1.7 second lead as the track rubbers in fully, and we see the grooves start to develop through corners. Drivers are actually rubbering in so low on the track, they have to start moving up or their car will get uneasy and not turn exactly how they need it to. On the last lap of stage 1, Bubba Wallace has closed the gap to 0.3 seconds to Larson, who was leading and ended up winning stage 1. On the restart for stage 2, Logano jumped Larson off the line as Larson spun the tires on the back of his car. One interesting thing I noticed about restarts in these races is it is very much about how position 3 and 4, when they start to bump draft the cars ahead. If one side bump drafts at better timing than the other side, then those two will likely become P1 and 2. If P2 and 4 bump draft each other better than P1 and 3 do, P2 will become P1, and P4 is going to follow him through and become P2. It is very, very, exciting and very cool to see how those, not the first row of cars, but the second row of cars really plays a role in how everything plays out in the order of the race. I think it was very interesting and very kind of intriguing to watch and learn about. Christopher Bell has suspension issues. At first, we think his front right tire is blown out, and it may have blown out, and that is what ended up breaking his tie rod end. He made it back to the pits, but unfortunately, it did end his race early. We do see, however, Hercules over there in the pits lifting up the front end of Christopher Bell's car by the fender, one of the gunmen, lifting it up so that the jack guy can get under it. I know those cars are built to be light, but it don't matter. He's still lifting up a racing car with his hands so that the jack guy can slide the jack under. It was very, very kind of funny and impressive to watch. Hamlin leads lap 180 to win stage 2, with Bubba Wallace finishing in second place behind him. On the restart, we see Chase Elliott jump around the outside of Hamlin, and that was actually on the stage 3 restart. Hamlin digs low through the corner on the next lap to retake the lead over Chase Elliott. Chase Elliott then comes ahead of Hamlin again after the pit stop sequence, as Hamlin stayed out a little bit longer than everybody else, wore his tires down, lost time, and did not have a good stop. With 9 laps to go, there is a chance for a 1-2-3 team finish with Byron, Chase Elliott, and Larson. With 3 laps to go, Nemechek blew out his front right tire and brought out the caution. This would send us into overtime. When overtime commences, Elliott and Byron are leading out the group. Byron wins the 400-lap race with the 1-2-3 coming out of the bag for Hendrick Motorsports and Chevrolet. Your top 10 for the Martinsville. What is it, a Grand Prix? Is it still a Grand Prix? The Martinsville Grand Prix top 10 are Byron, Larson, Elliott, Wallace, Blaney, Logano, Reddick, Bowman, Preece, and Briscoe. I stumbled there, so we're going to do it again. Byron, Larson, Elliott, Wallace, Blaney, Logano, Reddick, Bowman, Preece, and Briscoe. Thank you guys so much for being here. It really means the world to me. I would appreciate if you would follow. You can leave a like, you can subscribe, you can save the podcast on Spotify. If you leave a review on Spotify, it really means the world. It pushes it a little bit so more people can view it. Waiting for one of these to hit the algorithm one day on YouTube, on Spotify, on whatever. Share it with friends, share it with family, send it to one other person, send it to 2 people. I really appreciate it. For now, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, follow me in my socials link below. Come back next week as we go over race results and key moments in the motorsports world. Until next time, don't forget to brake late and accelerate